At this point, I would like to get the show going and introduce you to Professor Mike Turvey. Mike is certainly one of the statesmen of the Society for Ecological Psychology, and Mike is going to introduce our keynote speakers this morning. Thank you.
Have your seats, I noticed, down the front here, for those of you coming in late. The session is perceptual ecology. The first speaker is Professor William Mace from Trinity College.
Switching on the switch, which most of us probably don't really need. Forward from here. I didn't build in any backwards, so once I get at the beginning, it should be fine. All right. My goal today, okay, not standing too much, is to talk about the shared enterprise that we're all a part of. It's fun to work in science when you're all working on the same problem, where you know what the problems are that are under discussion. Most of us have been involved over the years in a number of apparent disagreements or conversations that didn't seem to get where we wanted them to go, notably forward. Sometimes they tend to go sideways or backwards. And often I think that when that happens, it may be because we haven't quite shared the same problem. So what I would like to try to do is to state a problem or two and some sub-problems and the way they've been addressed as a way of orienting ourselves at the beginning of the conference. A lot of what we share is implicit. So we think we share it, we don't always know. So that's why I thought I'd try to bring out a few more things explicitly. I think the example that Gibson has worked on of the occluding edge is a prime example to get us to where we want to get. But I'm going to be backing up most of the time today to issues prior to the occluding edge, working up to it so that we have an idea of what all the problems are that actually addresses when we get to it and read about research that's gone on about occluding edges. All right. We have, so this, for sometimes in our history, we've talked about to one another and lots of others about direct perception. And we've argued, been involved in arguments, and after a while you want to say, well, is that actually the problem we want to be stressing? Given that many of us think that it follows rather directly and appropriately, is there something else we might want to talk about to keep conversations from going awry? So, what might be fundamental problems we could talk about? Focus is one we've often talked about. Realism is another. We'll certainly get to that. Intentionality, how one thing can be about another thing, is extremely crucial. The environment, are we perceiving the environment or something else? And finally, what I've labeled here, empiricism. These are all possible ways to start a conversation about what the main issues are that then funnel down to actual research problems. I want to concentrate today, I've sort of decided on the last two. On Gibson's stress that what he was talking about was perception of the environment as opposed to mere experience. And oftentimes when we look at what we're comparing with one another in research, we see a lot of work about processes that don't necessarily add up to processes that explain how an animal gets in touch with the environment. And that's certainly the environment object is something Gibson stressed very much. But through the work of Harry Heft, drawing our attention back to more William James, the issue of empiricism strikes me as, in James, especially in James's radical empiricism, strikes me as a very interesting point of entry to describing our overall enterprise. Because radical empiricism is a way that William James used to underscore the problems without cheating. And I think we find many times that we cheat a little to get conversations going and keep them going, and sometimes don't realize when we've gone over the line. So in particular, suppose we often talk about investigating information for things in the world. We talk about specificity of various quantities to world properties. So we investigate correspondences between information and the world, and we ask sort of how well some candidate information variables specify something in the world. Okay, procedurally that's all right. Okay, but I would like to submit that the problem we want to be thinking about once in a while, just to stay oriented, might be looked at in a slightly different way. That is, most of the time we think about perception, our enterprise, in the results section of the experiments, where we've done something, we look at what happens, we draw conclusions from the results. Okay, that's where perceptual theories develop. What I want to suggest is that we keep in mind that our target in the long, long, long run is explaining the perception of the methods section. Is where all the veils are lifted. The methods section is where you say, I had 3 subjects in this experiment. Okay, I gave the subjects 4 rods of different lengths. Okay, how do you know there's a subject there? How do you know how many subjects there are? How do you know that you've got a rod? How do you know how long your rod is? Okay, you're sitting there looking at, measuring, taking a lot for granted, setting setting up your experiment, okay, and then you funnel things down and you give the subject whatever samples you want to provide to investigate the candidate issues of the moment, thinking about perception primarily for now. Okay? And that's how we do our work. Okay? But what are we trying to get our work to add up to? I think we're trying to get our work to add up to explaining how we perceive the environment around us all the time, every day. And in a way, you can sort of think about that as the world of the method section. Okay, the world that's taken for granted. Okay, sort of backing up from the results section. Okay, or part of the discussion, you sort of back up and say, well, all this stuff was behind the scenes. Okay, think about an Ames room. How do we account for the world of Adelbert Ames while he's building his room? Okay? I mean, that also is perceived. It's also part of perception, and that's where I think William James's radical empiricism comes in. Is if we look at James, okay, we see, especially in his radical empiricism, we see him drawing attention to the problem of explaining our awarenesses in life through experience without cheating and bringing in something behind the experience. Okay? That is, the world that explains our illusions. Okay? The world that provides the standards for our illusions is still a perceived world. Okay? And we want to keep in mind that that's our long-term target. That is, as environmental, ecological psychologists at least. Okay? People may have other targets, okay? But this is one that I think we ought to think about. And it's a goal that is getting at the explanation of perceiving the normal external world through experience only, okay, that is without cheating, is a hard challenge. Okay, James drew our attention to that in a very nice way. Okay, he didn't have many solutions. Gibson helped with some solutions to some of James's problems, but it's very hard to appreciate a solution to a problem if you don't see that as the problem. And I found that getting back to James, again at Harry Heff's admonition, has helped enormously in settling into appreciating the problem. And then, in reading Gibson, you can see that Gibson is really trying to work out an answer to questions like, how do we perceive the external world, okay, through pure experience. Gibson never talked about James's radical empiricism, but you can, but if you read James, you can start to get it. And you can then back up and see that Berkeley kind of got it. John Stuart Mill got it. That is, they understood that to explain the perception of the external world through experience, okay, is an interesting and important challenge. Okay, so let me go back to one piece where I said that we tend to set up our experiments to think about how well certain kinds of information specifies some environmental property. Okay, I think when we've really addressed the problems, what we need to say and see is how sense of the external environment, how a specification of the external environment emerges in information. That is, we've got perceptual information, visual, acoustic, haptic, all the combinations of various kinds of animals, and that's all they've got. You know, there isn't a magic behind the scenes. Okay, so within experience, within perceptual experience, how does the external world emerge? Okay, without cheating. Okay, and Gibson has offered some, following James's lead, has offered some important clues. Okay, radical for James and his radical empiricism meant thorough. Meant, you know, what I was saying here. It means it's all we've got. Okay. Now, some of James's main points in his radical empiricism are: we accept all of our experiences. Okay. Relations are real facts of experience. These include changes and transitions. Change is continuous. Okay, stop there a minute. What we want to say here is that it was extraordinarily important for James. The big move that made Gibson possible in many ways was that stress on relations as real facts. Okay? So, if a relation is real, and a transition can be experienced as such, a transition can be a unit, okay, it opens the way for the kind of things Gibson did with the occluding edge. Okay? In particular, if you see how Gibson talks about occlusion as a kind of transition, is where texture is sharply deleted or accreted to specify persistence of that which is hidden. The emphasis there is on the nature of the kind of transition that distinguishes it from other transitions where things disappear, like disintegration, evaporation, dissolution, and occlusion is a different transition. Okay? And occlusion is one of Gibson's criteria for how you get into differentiating the external world from other things. So for Gibson, you find the answer to the questions of how the external world emerges in examples like this, which are examples of invariance, which are a very important part of the answer. If you get internal criteria of experience for dividing your experiences into those that refer to the external world as other experience and those that don't, okay, you have the kind of thing, progress on the kind of problem that James set out without cheating. Okay? But as you get your sense of reality through your experience, okay, from Gibson and James, it's pragmatic. It's never complete. There's never a final answer to the question. It's not, is that a spoon or is that an affordance for eating or not? Okay, it's rather, how good is it right now? Okay, and if I need to know more, I can know more. Okay, but there's never an end. You can always learn and discover. James set that up. Gibson pursued it with great force. So I Last at UConn, I showed the Magritte slide, so I thought I would just vary it a little bit. Okay, so what's the bar across the middle? Well, I don't know. You don't even know what the question means. But if I do this, okay, you see the bar is part of a moving frame. It is itself a kind of window, okay, through which you see the other Magritte kind of displays. That's an example of a clarification or a specification, okay, where you got more information. Something was clarified. There was more structure. Okay. With representations like this, of course, there's no constraint, and you can do things like this. Okay. Now it's something else. Okay. But the point, okay, so I want to draw your attention to the overall problem of perceiving the external world. Okay? For James, this had to be solved all within experience. The experiences that you thought of as private versus public, for James, were different experiences that were connected in different ways, but they stayed in the same realm. Okay, so James has a quote that I've used about thinking of Memorial Hall at Harvard. How do I know if I'm really thinking about Memorial Hall or something that just kind of looks like it? Or if I use the word, do I really know how to use the word? The criterion is the sequence of experiences. If I can go through a sequence of experiences that takes me to what I take Memorial Hall to be, and I have the experiences associated with being in the presence of Memorial Hall, I'm there. Okay? And at some point, my experience is terminated in James's terms. Okay? I get enough for now. Okay? For other occasions, I might need more, so I get more. There's not an end to perceiving Memorial Hall or anything else. And there's no non-experiential hall sitting there. Okay? These are all parts of unfolding experience in a flow through one's life. Okay? And that's what it means to address the issue of the external world without cheating. Okay? And if we keep that, I think, in mind, okay, and then read Gibson, and then read the kind of research we'll hear about at the conference, okay, we can stay oriented on where we are and how we're proceeding down the path to understand these really hard, nice issues. Thank you.
Time for questions. So I have one.
There was one.
Okay, please.
I was wondering if you'd like to expand on the term without cheating.
Well, that's the core, isn't it? I think the best way to say it, what's an example of cheating with quotes? Practically we always cheat. But the idea is theoretically we have to understand that that's what we're doing. So if anytime I make a measurement, if I start talking about how someone perceives the rate of approach, when we understand sort of how well, whether Tau is being picked up or something related to Tau, and then we say, okay, how does that relate again to the larger kind of understanding. Where does that approach fit into what it is that's approaching, where it is, the full set of circumstances that we're perceiving all the time, recognizing that cheating is assuming all those things that we know all the time without addressing them as part of the problem in the long run. I mean, philosophically, it's what Dennett's called loans of intelligence. People logically call it petitio principii, assuming what you set out to prove. So it has that, in science, so we know what's cheating. I mean, that's basically it.
It's this strange loop in the method section of the paper, this observation that is the source of verification.
Right. And James works that out pretty well. He says, just if we recognize that this is part of, these are experiences too, and we didn't jump realms. That is, when we talk about the problem of perceiving the external world, okay, the external world is something we've learned about and that has emerged through experience. That's what James has tried to lay out. It's not something behind. He's got wonderful phrases about Kant and presuppositions lying behind the experience. And James has made the commitment to try to deal with it straight with experience, without rationalism, without presuppositions. And, if you're a rationalist, you wouldn't want to do that. But I think understanding Gibson is understanding that it's thoroughgoing empiricism, and it's radical empiricism, as James laid it out.
So the question that you're raising for methodology is, if experience doesn't have determination in the sense of then how does an experiment proceed in recognition of that kind of conceptual experiments always have a strict ideally strict aim, otherwise
Well, we don't always, right? I mean, there is a difference. Now, there is a difference. I mean, methodologically, in a really silly small example, there's the difference between experiments that allow people to investigate whatever they're looking at until they're ready to give an answer, which means, and practically it means, the answer is now so complete to the subject that any more time is irrelevant and wasted and redundant, and you know what you're going to know out of this situation, and you're not going to get anything more out of it, as opposed to, say, tachistoscopic flash, where you can't know anything more by investigating it. You just sort of have to sit there and think about it. But even in small occasions, I mean, where you allow somebody to decide for himself or herself when the situation's set, that's a small example.
further questions at the end. Our next speaker